Wow, time sure flies when you're having fun, huh? Can you believe that it's already time for me to half-ass another one of these videos? That introduction can only mean one thing, that it's time for a video that is not only not actually Trek Actually, but even less than that, a not actually Trek Actually comment response video. Let's see what I have to say about what you've had to say. This first group of comments is from the video I made recently about Michael Eddington and whether or not he was actually the hero of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This one is from Frederick Hogreff, who says, "My favorite part of For the Uniform is when Sisko orders the genocide of the planet and Worf begins to speak up. Sisko is all like, 'What, Mr. Worf, are you going to tell me not to commit genocide?' And Worf is like, 'No, I was just going to say our genocide missiles are slightly inefficient.'" You're actually remembering that scene a little bit incorrectly. Worf says that the poison payload on the missiles will make them less efficient when he thinks the plan is to shoot them at Maquis ships. He doesn't know what the actual target is. So Worf says that. He says, well, if we add that, trilithium poison to the missiles, it'll make them a little less efficient. And Sisko says, oh, no, don't worry. I've got that covered. We're not going to shoot them at other ships. We're going to shoot them at a planet. It'll be so easy to hit that. And then that's when Worf is like, okay, I guess we'll shoot the poison at the planet then. He has a momentary attack of conscience or hesitation where he's like, are we sure we're going to do this? And then Sisko's like, dude, I told you, shoot the missiles. And Worf's like, got it, boss. Because, Worf gets it. He's a Klingon. Sometimes you have to wipe out an entire species. He grew up hearing his elders sing songs of the great Tribble hunts. Assuming Odo's joke is accurate, which I've always assumed it to be. Here's one from Strange Radios. I was never sure if the writers always envisioned having Eddington make that turn. Was it part of the long story arc? Was it just an afterthought? In universe, had Eddington made the decision to join the Maquis before even being assigned to DS9? Or afterward? Also, as a Canadian, it's a bit of a bummer that one of the few Canucks represented in all of Star Trek is a guy who is thought of as a traitor. The key to good writing like that and good long-form storytelling in terms of character development and such is just making sure that it plays and that it makes sense and that it feels real and it feels like something that is emerging naturally from that character and their experiences. Whether you have planned it for years and you've been building up to it consciously this whole time, or whether it's something you just thought of and decided to throw in, that doesn't matter. It makes no difference whether you plan years ahead or whether you're just making it up as you go along, as long as it feels right and it feels real and it feels like, yes, it makes sense that this character would do that. That's the most important thing. And I think with Eddington, they get that. And with a lot of Deep Space Nine, they get that. And that is the mark of a really, really well-written show. Here's one from Nastro PC. My trouble with For the Uniform, that the whole internet needs to know about, is that the Les Miserables comparison doesn't work. Eddington is no Valjean, and Sisko isn't Javert. Odo is Javert. You've been making that clear since Season 1. Why are you fucking around and confusing things? I don't know why they didn't just stick to the go-to Star Trek literary illusion and frame Sisko as Ahab. If you are looking at it in terms of what character in the show, from our perspective as a viewer, makes the most sense as an allegory for or a parallel to the character of Javert or the character of Valjean. Yeah, Odo does seem more like a Javert type than Sisko does. I agree. But remember, it's not the writers of the show drawing a parallel between the characters and Les Miserables for our benefit. They're putting themselves in Eddington's head. This is Eddington projecting this onto his relationship with Sisko. So the most important thing isn't whether or not it makes sense to us that Eddington is Valjean and Sisko is Javert. The most important thing is that it makes sense to Eddington. Eddington sees himself as Valjean, and he sees Sisko as Javert, or he tells Sisko that he sees him as Javert, as kind of a mind game or to try to get through to Sisko somehow. So that's what really matters. It's Eddington making that comparison. And what does that tell us about Eddington? And Sisko uses that to guide his strategy in facing off against Eddington. He says, oh, he thinks of himself as Valjean. He thinks of me as Javert. How can I use that? So that's what matters. Not, well, if you zoom out and look at the show from an objective perspective as an audience member, is Sisko really a Javert? Maybe not. Is Eddington really a Valjean? Maybe not. That doesn't matter. That's not the point. This one's from Brian Stiles. Moral event horizon is now something I'll be using a lot. Well written, sir. Well, I can't take credit for that. Moral event horizon was a pre-existing phrase that I used, but it's commonly used by a lot of people. I think it has its own TV tropes page. I am not sure where the origin of that phrase comes from, but I have heard that for years to describe a character doing something that is sort of a point of no return, ethically speaking. And I agree, it's a wonderful phrase. It's very succinct and pithy and gets the point across right away in just a few words. It's a really, really terrific phrase. But it's not mine. I didn't come up with that. I am not that good of a writer. And here's one from Chris Klee. You betrayed your uniform is up there with it's a fake in the best single outbursts of Star Trek. I would agree with you, and there are 3 more great outbursts in Star Trek that I feel deserve to be mentioned in this conversation. One of them is another one from Deep Space Nine, from Dramatis Personae, one of my favorite episodes from season 1, when they've been infected with like the alien consciousnesses and they're acting out this power struggle aboard the station, and Chief O'Brien suggests that maybe it might be necessary for Commander Sisko to leave the station, and Sisko jumps up from behind his desk and screams, "Never!" That's one. Another one is from the Sarek episode of TNG, when Picard has undergone the mind meld to help Sarek maintain his composure during negotiations, and Picard is feeling a lot of Sarek's really like heightened Vulcan emotions. And he goes, "It is wrong. It is wrong." That's 2. I love that one. And then the third one is, of course, from The Enemy Within in classic Trek, when evil Captain Kirk hears good Captain Kirk make an announcement over the intercom, and he totally freaks out and loses it and screams, "I'm Captain Kirk!" So, I feel like that's a pretty solid top 5. And now some comments from the video that followed the Eddington video, which was about the justifications and the ethics of the Maquis in general. And this first one comes from Jeff Benson, who says, now, question, didn't the treaty not only put a number of Federation colonies under Cardassian control, but also put a number of Cardassian colonies under Federation control? The latter never gets mentioned except for Journey's End and possibly in the Maquis Parts 1 and 2. Right, and I think the actual reason for that is that that's not the story. The writers chose to make the central focus of the Maquis story on the former Federation colonies in Cardassian space rather than the Cardassian colonies in Federation space. But if you want an in-story reason as to why those Cardassian colonies don't get very much attention, I just sort of assumed that the Cardassians that were living there packed up and got the hell out. You know, when they heard that their planets were going to fall under Federation jurisdiction, they were just like, oh, all right, see ya. And they packed up and left and resettled on some Cardassian planet. That would be my assumption if you are reaching for an in-story explanation as to why we don't hear anything about those other colonies. Here's a comment from Leith Martin. The people in Journey's End have to be Native Americans because of their sacred bond to the planet. A people with a different culture and spiritual belief would pack up and reluctantly move. This seems like a typical oversight of Westerners. Sentimentality is a trite way to characterize what is an almost familial relationship with the planet in question. If someone told you to give up your family, who cannot or will not consent to this, just to end a conflict you had nothing to do with, would you do it? Well, keeping in mind that, as you point out, I am a Westerner, and I have that perspective, and it is difficult for me to imagine and impossible for me to really know what it would feel like from the perspective of a Native American or a member of some other indigenous group that was in that situation. Yes, I would do it. I might feel very reluctant about it. I might feel very resentful of being forced to do it. But yes, of course I would do it. Doesn't mean I'd be happy about it, but I would do it. Yes, if the government came to me and said, hey, you got to move because we gave your house away in order to resolve a conflict, I'm not saying I would be thrilled. I'm not saying I would even maybe necessarily support the government's decision, but I would move. I would not do what the members of the Maquis do and take up arms, because I do not think that would be a legitimate reason to take up arms. If it were done for that purpose, I have to move to another house, but the trade-off for that is it ends what could be an incredibly destructive conflict that could get thousands or millions of more people killed. Yeah, I would be willing to do that. But again, I'm saying that as me, not as a member of one of those indigenous groups who, would have a very, very different perspective on it. Here's a comment from John Kirk. The relocation aspect reminded me of an early DS9 episode, Progress, where Bajor needs to evacuate people from a moon, but one guy doesn't want to leave. In that scenario, it's not about ending a war, and nobody's life is at risk, but there is still the needs of the many argument. If that guy was in the wrong, which the episode implied, then the DMZ colonists are also wrong. Conversely, if the colonists have the moral high ground, maybe the moon farmer did too. When I watched that, and I love that episode. That's one of my favorite first season Deep Space Nine episodes. I think it's fantastic. I think Nana Visitor is great in it. I think Brian Keith, who guest stars as Mullabach, the reluctant farmer who doesn't want to leave, I think it's a really, really wonderful episode. But in terms of the ethical dilemma, I am completely and totally in the camp of just beam the old bastard out of there. Right? Like, he's being stubborn. He is holding up a project that will... that we are told, and I choose to accept because it's what we're told in the episode, that will result in producing energy that will benefit thousands, perhaps millions of people on Bajor, that will be an important part of this restoration project that the Bajoran government is undertaking as a way of rebuilding after the Cardassian occupation that destroyed the planet and destroyed their civilization. And here's this one guy on this moon saying, well, I don't want to leave. Well, sorry, dude, you're leaving. And guess what? We have technology that allows us to just pick you up and move you. So that's what we're going to do. That is very much my position. I'm sorry. I am sympathetic to your position emotionally. I know it must suck to be forced to leave your home for something that you don't consent to or you don't understand or whatever, but you are the only person standing in the way of this project that is going to benefit millions of people. We're not going to kill you. We're not going to throw you out on the street. We're going to give you a new place to live, and you're going to be fine. But you have to go. And I feel like that is it's a similar situation to the Maquis. We're off. Yes, I understand. Emotionally, it sucks. And you have an attachment to the land. And maybe some of these colonies have been here for generations and you have family roots here. I get it. It's not an ideal situation. It sucks. And if you want to be pissed at us, be pissed at us. Maybe we deserve it. But we have to do this to end a war. So that's the way it has to be. It's a matter of being sympathetic to the people who are forced to move, of course, but not sympathetic to the point that I would be on their side if they tried to start a war over it, Here's one from Progressive Rocks. While I agree that in the I like my home versus stopping an interstellar war argument, I would come down on the Federation's side, I can't help but be reminded of the argument against illegal immigrants, that they should just come here legally like X's parents did. In that case, it's not a simple if-then situation. The ports of entry are notoriously difficult to pass through by design. I wonder how much it would change the Maquis' justification if their option of going back to the Federation and collecting their 40 acres and a cow was no longer available. Well, for me, that would change it a lot. A big part of the reason why I am on the Federation's side much more than I'm on the Maquis side in that conflict is because of the presumed guarantee that, yes, they're being forced to move, but they're being moved somewhere else, and it will not be a long-term hardship to them. You know, land or planets, as it were, are not presented as a finite resource. And it's not presented as, well, we're going to move you someplace else, and the place we're going to move you to is going to be a lot shittier than the place that you have already. It's not going to be a downgrade for you. We have other planets that are just as nice, that are similar to where you are. We're going to move you there out of the zone of conflict, and everybody will be happier in the long run. If that was not the case, if the Federation was saying, you have to leave, and after you leave, you're on your own, or you have to leave, and the other place we have for you is someplace where you're not going to be as comfortable, you're not going to have as high a quality of life as you have in your current homes, then I do think that changes the equation quite a bit. But if the situation is, we're moving you someplace else, and the place we're moving you to is just as good as the place that you live. I mean, of course, as I've said a couple times already, minus the spiritual or emotional attachments you might have to the place where you are, which can't be replaced. And that's, something that is incredibly unfortunate. But given the upside, I think worth it. If that was not in place, then yes, of course, that changes it tremendously. Then the Maquis, from where I sit, have a much stronger moral justification for doing what they're doing. If they're being forced to give up their homes in exchange for less than or nothing, then that's a completely different situation. Here's one from Captain Andy. You might feel a bit differently about forced relocation if you actually had to do it. I know in Star Trek it's a bit different because they have beaming and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of identical planets, but nonetheless, home is home. I think the problem with trying to fit a gritty bunch of freedom fighters such as the Maquis into a show like Star Trek is that the Federation is so well established as a super squeaky clean place to live that it's difficult to create a scenario comparable to the situation that created the original Maquis. Side note, it's also why I struggle with the newer, grittier Trek series we've seen of late. They feel a bit shoehorned into the squeaky clean Trek universe. I don't really have a problem with that because I view it as just we're seeing corners of it that we haven't seen before. The idea of the way Deep Space Nine has presented the Federation, or the way Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Picard have presented the Federation, it's not so much that, well, all of a sudden the Federation is bad. It's that we're seeing aspects of it that haven't been shown before that make things more complex. Even in Star Trek Picard, when at the beginning of the first season, it feels like the Federation and Starfleet has lost its way in a very important way by banning synthetic life forms and by, adopting these policies that we wouldn't necessarily associate with Starfleet or the Federation. Even then, it's not a dystopia. It's still a mostly utopian, idealized, positive, healthy society that has failed morally in a very, very important way that it needs to correct, but that just shows that it's not perfect, So to me, it fits in with what we've seen all along just fine. It's just that we're seeing parts of it that we just haven't seen before, and that compel us to ask questions that we haven't been compelled to ask before. And as for the first part of your comment about the forced relocation, again, yes, I probably would feel differently about it if I were forced to relocate. If I were forced to relocate for a reason that was comparable to the reason that was given the Maquis, I probably wouldn't be very happy about it. But I would do it rather than take up arms against the government. I feel like that's the line that I'm drawing. Yes, it sucks. It's okay to say this isn't fair to these people, but is it enough of a justification to take up arms? I don't think it is. And last one from the Maquis video from Jason Muller. Steve, relocating people is genocide, not figuratively. Look, I don't want to argue too vociferously in favor of forced relocations. I feel like I've made it pretty clear that my position on that is that they are bad. But I am also willing to leave enough room for the fact that in certain cases, they may be necessary and permissible. Now, is what the United States government did to Native Americans in the 19th century in that category? No, absolutely not. I think that definitely qualifies as genocide, or at least something very, very close to it. I mean, that was an action that that did destroy or seriously damage, at least, the histories and the cultures and the communities of particular groups of people for no justification, for no reason. It was an act of violence, even if it wasn't overt violence, even if they weren't always being shot at and killed. It was, on the whole, an act of violence, an act of cultural violence to force people to move to other places for the convenience of those who had more power than them. That definitely qualifies as genocide or in the realm of genocide, if nothing else. But what about a forced relocation because the state wants to build a dam and they need to move people out of a town that would be in an area that's flooded? And the upside of it is, well, yes, these people are having to leave their homes, but the dam will generate electricity that will serve a population of millions. Is it genocide to force the people in that town to leave? Assuming that they are rightfully compensated for the move, as I've been saying is very important in the Maquis argument. As long as they are rightfully compensated and as long as they are made whole after the move, given the benefit that we are getting from them moving, I feel like that's permissible. Again, not ideal, not something that should necessarily be celebrated, but not something that is an atrocity, you know? So I do think there are certain special circumstances where a forced relocation done the right way for the right reason is permissible and is not an act of genocide. I don't think people who had to leave, who had to leave their houses and were, required to move somewhere else so that a dam could be built that would serve millions of people with electricity were victims of a genocide. But people who were in indigenous tribes in the Americas in the 19th century who were forced to leave, yes, absolutely they were. And I think in most, if not nearly all cases, that kind of forced relocation may even rise to the level of a genocide or something close to that, and should be avoided if at all possible. But in certain cases, and I think the Maquis situation, in a fictional world would be one of those cases, it doesn't rise to that level. I don't think the proposed relocation of the Maquis would qualify as a genocide. Now, these next several comments were left on my previous comment response video. Here's a comment from Tom Holmes. If they had made Worf look like a TOS Klingon when he was in the past, that would have also ended up taking a lot of heat off of Discovery for changing the Klingons, as well as other stuff like the Enterprise later, making it clear that TOS only looks the way it does because that's what was possible to make him the 60s, and future Star Trek creators aren't bound to stick with that appearance when they have the resources to do better. Maybe. I mean, I would like to hope that would have been the case. I am sorry that they didn't do that. Now that other people have suggested that, I'm sorry they didn't do that just because I think that would have been a great visual gag. And it would have been a nice way to sort of, elbow the people who are obsessed with continuity and say, look, just lighten up. It's just a TV show. Don't worry about it. That's not the point of any of this. You're getting upset about things that don't really matter. I would have liked it for that reason. But yes, I would like to hope that maybe it would have had the effect of lessening that preoccupation with things like that. But I also think there's also a cynical part of me that thinks, no, that probably wouldn't have made that big of a difference. Like the people that are the Star Trek equivalent of biblical literalists are always going to be that way and are always going to get hung up on stuff like that. And even if the show itself somehow comes out and finds a way indirectly through the story or through a visual gag like that or something to say to them, look, don't get upset about this. This doesn't matter. Focus on the story. Focus on the characters. Don't worry about how things look. Don't worry about if the aesthetic of Discovery doesn't match the aesthetic of a Star Trek show that was made 50 years before. That's not important. Even if the franchise actively does that, and I might even argue that it has done that a time or two, there are still people who will get hung up on that because that's just the way they are. And the best thing to do, in my experience, is to either make fun of them so they stop commenting on your videos, or ignore them. Here's a comment from Christiana Bradshaw. I know Kirk Spock is the most common slash fiction pairing, but I always found Kirk McCoy more intriguing. Oh man, yeah, can you imagine the hate sex between those two? Actually, I guess you can, because you say you have always found it a more intriguing slash fiction pairing. So yeah, I would guess you have imagined it many, many times. Here's one from Serious Mind. While we tend to disagree about continuity, I think you'll agree that a storyline needs to be consistent with itself at least. For sure, I definitely agree with that. Where we might reach a point of divergence is when we start to try and define what counts as a storyline. Because if we're talking about, obviously, if we're talking about a single episode, yes, I would want the story of a single episode to be consistent with itself. If we're talking about a multi-episode story arc, yes, I would like that to be consistent with itself. But if we zoom out to the level of the entire franchise, where we're talking about multiple TV shows and movies produced by many different people, working in many cases completely independently of one another or years apart from one another, do I insist that all of that be consistent with itself? No, of course not. I don't care about inconsistencies between Classic Trek and TNG or Classic Trek and Discovery or whatever. We're talking about shows that were produced years, even decades apart by completely different groups of people that, yes, take place in the same fictional universe, but I don't have any expectation or any demand that they're going to line up perfectly with each other and nothing is ever going to contradict something that was established in another show. I think that's silly. And even within a single series, and maybe part of this is because I was sort of weaned on TV in the 80s and 90s, and this sort of thing just was done from time to time. Even within a single series, if, for instance, the writers did something like mentioning in season 1 that Captain Picard was an only child, and then deciding in season 4 that he had a brother, right? Which I don't think they did. I think when his brother Robert showed up in Family in season 4, I don't think that was a retcon. I don't think that contradicted anything. In fact, I think he may have been mentioned a time or two leading up to that. But let's say he wasn't. Let's say there was an episode in season 1 where Picard says, I was an only child. And then we get to season 4 and he goes to Earth and there's his older brother. I wouldn't have cared about that. I don't care. Because sometimes that kind of thing is done. You know, the writers decide, well, who cares? We have a good idea for a story. Let's just say that Picard has a brother. And they retcon it and it's fine, right? That kind of thing I don't care about either. But yeah, consistency within a single episode or a single multi-episode story arc, I would say is very important. And for the most part, consistency within an entire series is important too. But little things like what I just mentioned, little retcons here and there to facilitate stories, I don't have a problem with. And I don't have a problem with stuff like that, or even bigger inconsistencies when you zoom out to the franchise level. Here's a comment from mkang87. Another enjoyable video. I appreciate that you are open to considering constructive criticism as well as different perspectives. Unrelated, how do you feel about Karl Urban's portrayal of McCoy? I really like Karl Urban as McCoy. As I've mentioned several times, I think McCoy is my favorite Classic Trek character. And one of the big reasons why McCoy is my favorite Classic Trek character is I really, really like the work that DeForest Kelley does. I think DeForest Kelley is the best actor in the classic Star Trek cast. And I think he's just brilliant as McCoy. But I think Urban is really, really good. And whatever minor problems I have with the way McCoy is portrayed in those films are not from Karl Urban's performance. And they're very minor problems because I am a big fan of the Kelvin Timeline movies, and I'm super excited that they're finally making another one. Like, I'm really, really looking forward to another Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Karl Urban, Zoe Saldana, Simon Pegg Star Trek movie. Like, I'm really, really excited about that. But there are times when the way McCoy is written in those films, he's a little bit Flanderized. You know, he comes out with the homespun aphorisms a little too frequently. In fact, I think they actually lampshade that in Star Trek Into Darkness when he throws out some weird like country homespun metaphor to Kirk in a crucial moment, and Kirk kind of looks at him funny and says, "No more metaphors on the bridge." Like they sort of acknowledge it, but that's a writing issue. That's not an acting issue. In terms of his performance, I think Carl Urban is terrific. I think he's a great McCoy. I think they all are. Like, I think Chris Pine is a great Captain Kirk. I think Zachary Quinto is a fantastic Spock. I think Carl Urban is a great McCoy. I think Simon Pegg is a great Scotty. I think Zoe Saldana is a great Uhura. I think they all do a really, really terrific job. I think it's an awesome cast. I'm really hyped. I'm going to get to see them as those characters again. And hopefully it'll be a good movie. And these next several comments are from my video about shipping 7 of 9 with some of her Star Trek Voyager castmates. Here's one from Michael Hainline, who says, "I always found the idea of 7 hooking up with anyone a bit of an ethical quandary. She went into the collective when she was like 8 years old, if I remember correctly. When she's first liberated, a huge part of her arc is that she obviously lacks any of that emotional development of someone her biological age. She seems to be an example of the born sexy yesterday trope to an extent. Is she really able to give full sexual consent? As time goes on and she develops that emotional maturity, a sexual relationship seems more ethical, but where is the point that it became okay?" See, that last question is really the good one, because I do think at a certain point after she emerges from the collective that she is basically an adult. Like, she's not a child. I think after she emerges from the collective and she's had a chance to acclimate herself to being an individual and living among the rest of the crew, that it's no longer an ethical problem as to whether or not she could enter into a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship and be able to consent meaningfully to that. But I suppose there would be a line, right? There would be a point where it wasn't okay and then a point where it was okay. And I guess in that situation, you would just want to err on the side of caution and just wait. Just wait a good long time. Like, actually, I just watched the series Single Drunk Female. I just finished watching the first season of that. It's really good. It's a really good show. And it's about a woman who is a recovering alcoholic and her struggles to put her life back together and maintain her sobriety. And she is told by a guy that she likes and wants to hook up with that, "Oh no, you're not allowed to hook up with a recovering drunk until they've been sober for 1 year and 1 day. Before that, it's considered not right, not conducive to recovery, like it's too soon. You're too vulnerable until you've been sober for 1 year and a day." And I think the idea of that is not that after you've been sober for 1 year and a day, a switch gets flipped and you are magically just okay to re-enter the realm of sexuality and romance. It's that by that point, assuming that you have been going to your meetings and doing your steps and doing what you need to do in your recovery, as after you've been sober for 1 year and a day, it's a safe bet that you're okay and that you're ready, right? So you were probably ready before that. Maybe you were ready a long time before that. But by the time you reach that milestone, it's a safe bet that you are ready. So that's why that practice is in place. And of course, it's not like a law, but it's just, it's presented in the show. And I don't know how accurate it is to actual recovery programs. I've never been involved in an actual recovery program, but I get the impression that it's something that was drawn from real life. And it's presented in the show as something that is just a very common practice, right? And I think maybe something like that would be applied to 7 of 9. You know, wait until she's been unassimilated for 1 year and a day. She's probably okay. You know, she's probably able to be an adult and to consent to things that adults do before it's been 1 year and a day. But just wait, just to make sure it's okay, to make sure she's capable of giving consent, to make sure that she won't be taken advantage of or exploited in any way, and that it's okay, right? So something like that. I feel like a rule like that needs to be practiced in the case of 7. There's one from Craptacular. Adjust your angle of attack by 17 degrees to port and increase vigorousness by 23%. This is now acceptable. Well, yeah, communication with your partners. Very important. Here's one from Ian Lister. I think Steve overthought the divorce. After 12 months of being missing, chances are Starfleet would allow people to get a divorce, or if there are regular letters, the legal system could work with that. But you're missing the point of me specifying that weird, convoluted, Ferengi-facilitated divorce, which is that the husband has to be a jerk-ass who goes through a one-sided divorce from Samantha in order to fit the romantic comedy formula, right? Samantha has to have been left high and dry. She has to have been dumped by her husband, by the man she thought was the man of her dreams. And then 7 is the recovery that restores her faith and allows her to love again, right? It's all about following a cheesy, hoary romantic comedy formula, not doing the most efficient thing to get Samantha out of her marriage. Because, yeah, I mean, you're probably right. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. And it wouldn't be a huge part of the show if I wrote it. I mean, that would be a line of dialogue, right? Or, Samantha reading a subspace message delivered through the Pathfinder project, just informing her of the divorce that happened. It wouldn't be like a huge bunch of shit in the show. It would be like a line of dialogue just to establish that, her husband is a jerk-ass and he has put her in this situation. It's following the romantic comedy formula, which was the whole point of that bit. And now this last bunch of comments is from my video about how Star Trek has always been horny, and this first one is from Eric S. I'm surprised Steve did not mention Risa, the brothel planet the entire crew of starships travel to as a group. Also, Quark makes it clear that half of his customers use the holodeck for sexual fantasy. There were so many comments on that video from people who were pointing out things that I did not even mention that indicate how deeply, unavoidably, undeniably horny Star Trek has always been, and it just serves to further strengthen that point, that Star Trek has always been like that. That maybe it's a little more explicit at times now because it's on a streaming service, but it's always been horny as shit. And yes, Risa is a big one. There's a fuck planet. Canonically, in Star Trek, there's a planet where people go to fuck, called Risa, and everybody knows about it, and apparently everybody, or pretty much everybody, goes there. And yeah, the thing with Quark and the holosuites as well, absolutely. So there's stuff I didn't even mention in my video that tells you that this is a super horny show. Here's one from Scott Dittman. Hey, Steve, always love your videos, especially when you call out the confused part of the fandom that doesn't like the diversity. I think that's the one part where you really missed, though, in this video. I think the current crop of fans you speak of in this video aren't mad at the sexuality of current Star Trek. They just hate that it isn't heterosexuality. I think you're onto something there. That is a very, very good point. Is it a coincidence that Star Trek Discovery is, I think it's safe to say, still the most hated of the new Trek shows among that particular group of angry fans, and it's also the most overtly LGBTQ representative? It's the show with the same-sex couple. It's the show with the trans character. It's the show with the non-binary character, right? I think that is probably a big part of it, for sure. The people who say, like, I just wish they wouldn't shove it down our throats. Or they say, I understand that Star Trek has always been progressive and Star Trek has always been about equality for different kinds of people, but TNG never shoved it down your throat like this. What's that mean? You never had to see two dudes kiss on TNG, huh? And that upsets you when you see two dudes kiss on Discovery, right? When Stamets and Culber kiss. And they're boys, and boys aren't supposed to kiss other boys. That's gross, right? You find that upsetting, huh? You don't like that. Makes you uncomfortable, right? And that's shoving it in your face. Having two characters just do that every once in a while. In, honestly, a pretty chaste way, right? It's not even like they're going to town on each other. It's not even like they're Frenching each other. They're like pulling each other into the turbo lift and just fucking going at it. It's just every once in a while a nice, chaste little sweet kiss from husband to husband. And that's just too much for you fuckers to handle, huh? You just can't take it. They're ruining Star Trek. Why does everything have to be so gay all the time? It's two characters. And maybe twice a season you see them kiss real quick. Too much for you. Yeah, I do think you're onto something there. Here's one from Stardust13. I love the part of the perfect mate when Riker shows Kamala to her room, then immediately touches his comm badge and says, if anyone needs me, I'll be in the holodeck. What a filthy line. I love that so much. And can you imagine the high fives that must have been exchanged in the writer's room when they learned that Standards and Practices was going to let that joke stay in the show? The celebration that must have gone up in that writer's room when they realized we did it. We got a jerk-off joke into Star Trek. We got a Riker is going to go jerk off on the holodeck joke because he's so horny. He has to go straight to the holodeck and fuck some holograms because Riker is super horny and needs to come right now. We got that on the show. That is on the show. Kids are going to watch that. I'd be high-fiving people. You think me and Ronald Moore wouldn't have vigorously high-fived each other after that? Fuck yeah. That's why you get into the business. That's why you become a writer in the first place, to get jack-off jokes into Star Trek shows. Into any show that a family's going to watch, really. I mean, that's why I wanted to become a writer. That was my aspiration. I mean, I'm stuck doing YouTube videos, but, I keep hoping one day maybe I'll get an opportunity to write a stealth jerk-off joke into a show that will then be watched by families across the world. My day's gonna come. Here's one from Adam W. Beverly's MILF status was cemented earlier than Sub Rosa. In The Host, it was strongly implied that she was riding Odan on a very frequent basis, and when the symbiont got transferred to Riker, she ended up riding him too. I always found that funny. Despite the will they won't they between Beverly and Picard present since the first episode, Riker still got to nail her first. Riker got to have enthusiastically consensual and hopefully mutually enjoyable sex with her. She's not to be nailed. She's not an object. Although I presume there was some hammering involved. Anyway, yeah, no, I agree with you. Her MILF status was definitely, actually, her MILF status was established even before The Host. For me, personally, her MILF status was established as soon as she appeared on the show. Her MILF status was put in place in Encounter at Farpoint. Because remember, MILF is Mom I'd like to fuck, right? Not sexually active Mom I'd like to fuck. That's a some-MILF. That's a different thing. It doesn't matter whether Beverly is currently fucking anyone or not. It's Mom I'd like to fuck. You're projecting what you want onto the person. It's aspirational. And finally, comment from Sutek Seth. Whining, miserable dickheads is exactly what I imagine whenever someone's comparing new Trek to old Trek and how we've gotten so much worse or whatever. Thank you for being a more positive Trek nerd. I do try to stay positive. I know that with my more recent episode reviews, because this year for the first time I'm doing episode by episode reviews of the current show. So I did episode reviews of Discovery, and I did an episode review of the first 4 episodes of Picard last week, because I didn't do individual episode reviews of those because I was still reviewing Discovery and I didn't have time to do episode reviews of both shows at the same time. But and my opinion of the especially the second half of Discovery's 4th season was not very positive. I didn't think the show was at its best in the second half of the 4th season of Discovery, especially. And I have not enjoyed the first episodes of season 2 of Picard very much at all. Like, I just think the show is a mess. It's terribly written. The pacing is awful. The character motivations are barely there. I do not think season 2 of Picard is very good at all at this point. And I made a review that was reflective of that feeling. That was a negative, critical review of Picard. And a lot of people left comments on that video saying, I mean, most of them were constructive. They were saying, well, I disagree with you. And, and that's great. But there were a few people who seemed kind of dismayed or kind of mad at me that I was giving it a negative review, and were saying things like, you've become so jaded, or I liked it better when you were being positive. And it's a difficult thing because overall, I still am positive. Like, I'm not saying, well, season 2 of Picard sucks and this is the death of Star Trek. Like, no, of course not. That's something that a child would say. Just because I don't think that the show is very good at this point doesn't mean that I've given up on the new Star Trek shows or that I think Star Trek sucks now or anything like that. Just like it didn't mean that when I said I'm probably giving up on Lower Decks because I didn't really like that in the second season. Doesn't mean I think people who like it are doing something wrong. It doesn't mean I think people who still want to watch it and are enjoying it are bad or that it's, destroying Star Trek, right? It just means I don't like it. I don't think it's funny. With Picard, so far, I'm hoping that it gets better. I'm going to keep watching it. I'm going to watch the rest of the season. I'm hoping it improves, but so far, up to episode 4, it has not been very good at all. And people disagree with me, which is fine. But just because I don't think the show itself is very good so far, doesn't mean that I think everything about new Star Trek is terrible. Doesn't mean I think Alex Kurtzman should be fired or any of this other horseshit that people say. It just means that there's a Star Trek show currently being released that I don't think is very good. And guess what? It's not the first time that's happened. I'm still a fan of Star Trek. I still like Star Trek. I'm still going to talk about Star Trek. I'm still going to be supportive of the new shows. But I'm not going to pretend that I like them if I don't. But at the same time, I'm not going to criticize them or speak negatively of them in such a way that delegitimizes the entire thing and say, oh, it's not real Star Trek, or the people who make this show don't know anything about Star Trek, anything. That's not where I'm coming from at all. I mean, Christ, look, I'm wearing a Picard t-shirt. I got a Chateau Picard t-shirt. All right. If I really hated the show and thought it was terrible and thought it was something that should just be expunged from the culture or whatever, or thought it was killing Star Trek, this thing that I loved, I would not be buying the merch. Okay. So hopefully those of you who enjoy my work and enjoy my channel and enjoy my Star Trek stuff, and part of the reason why you enjoy it is because it's not as negative and angry and full of angst and full of fandom menace horseshit as all those other assholes. Hopefully you won't be too driven away or too offended if every once in a while, as I'm reviewing the new stuff, I'm not completely over the moon about it, because that's bound to happen, right? But my overall feeling and philosophy towards Star Trek as a whole and toward the new stuff is positive and supportive. And even if I don't like it or I don't think it's very good, I want it to be good. I don't want it to go away. I don't want them to just stop making it, right? And I don't think the people making it are bad people or are committing any kind of a crime or are ruining anything for me. I hope that the show gets better, right? And I'm very happy that there are those of you out there who are enjoying it. I'm glad that you like the first 4 episodes of season 2 of Picard. I don't get it. There are people who are leaving comments on my review saying, I think it's the best paced show of the new Trek show so far, and I think it's been great, and I've been on the edge of my seat, and I've loved every second of it. I don't get that at all. That makes no sense to me, because I see the show completely differently. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it. I think that's wonderful. So there you go. Anyway, that was the last comment. That's my last comment response. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for the comments and giving me material to do one of these every couple of months. And if you want to support my channel and my work here, whether I'm talking about Star Trek or comic books or whatever I'm talking about, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. You can click the join button to become a channel member. You can throw in a one-time donation if you don't want to become a monthly contributor through Patreon or a channel membership. You can just throw in a one-time donation of whatever you can afford or whatever you think I'm worth through PayPal or Venmo, and links to all of that are in the video description. I will be back in a few weeks with the next Regulation Trek Actually video, which will be about the question of, is Star Trek actually any good at horror? And after that, there will be another video that was that I was commissioned to make by a viewer, and that'll be fun too. So I'll see you in a few weeks for more Star Trek stuff. I'll see you before that for other stuff. And thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you again, take care, everybody.